Forget everything you thought you knew about The Revenant, because guess what? The true story of Hugh Glass is way wilder than anything Hollywood cooked up. You thought the movie was a gripping survival saga with revenge served ice cold. Well, strap in, because the real tale is way crazier. And less about revenge and more about, well, a guy just trying to survive a bear attack. Yeah, that's right. No dramatic vendettas, no deep philosophical monologues, just a dude with a major grudge against nature. In the movie, DiCaprio gets left for dead, battles a bear, and spends the next 3 hours chasing down the guy who abandoned him. But that's not exactly how it went down. The movie's got more twists than a soap opera, and we're about to reveal how Hollywood took the most insane survival story and turned it into a revenge flick. Buckle up, because we're about to rip apart The Revenant scene by scene. And trust me, you'll never look at DiCaprio's Oscar-winning performance the same way again. Spoiler, it's not all as glamorous as the film makes it seem. So, Hugh Glass's life reads like a series of unbelievable events, one after another. But let's start at the very beginning, because this guy didn't just wake up one day as a legendary frontiersman. No. Hugh Glass's early life was more like a real-life action movie, but without the Hollywood budget. He was born in 1783, and by the time he was a young man, he was already in the thick of some wild adventures that most people wouldn't believe. Let's get this straight. Glass didn't just wander into the wilderness on a whim. His life was a mix of bad luck, bad decisions, and, well, more bad luck. So, at the ripe old age of around 19, Glass found himself in a pretty sticky situation. He was captured by pirates. Yes, pirates. Now, you might be wondering, wait, what? But let me explain. Back then, pirates weren't just hanging out in the Caribbean, sipping cocktails on the beach like Jack Sparrow. They were raiding ships, and poor Hugh got snatched up during one of these raids. He ended up working for these pirates for 2 whole years, and I can only imagine how that went. You're gonna work for us, matey." But Glass wasn't exactly the type to take orders from anyone, especially not pirates. So, what did he do? He escaped. Yep, after 2 years of being a pirate employee, Glass managed to break free. Talk about a dramatic exit. But of course, his luck didn't exactly turn around after that. You'd think a guy who escaped pirates would have a smooth ride ahead, right? Well, not for Hugh. Just a short time later, he was captured again, this time by the Pawnee tribe. Now, he wasn't captured because he was messing with them. Glass had just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while that might have sounded like the end of his story, it wasn't. You see, instead of being killed, Glass was adopted by the tribe. That big boy got adopted. Well, they took him in, gave him a new life, and taught him how to survive in the wilderness. So, if you thought being captured by pirates was a low point for him, just wait, it gets wilder. Eventually, Glass was released by the Pawnee and began his next chapter, becoming a part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. This was where his skills truly came into play. The fur trade in the early 1800s was an insane business. Men went into the wild, trapped fur-bearing animals, and lived off the land. But it wasn't for the faint of heart. If you weren't tough, you didn't last long. Glass wasn't just a guy looking for some adventure. He was a man who had already survived being captured twice, escaped pirates, and learned how to navigate one of the harshest terrains in America. So, naturally, he fit right in. Glass became a part of William Henry Ashley's fur trading expedition, which was a big deal back then, and quickly earned a reputation for his wilderness skills. It wasn't just about trapping fur. It was about surviving in a brutal world where death could come from any direction, whether it was a grizzly bear, a bad storm, or, getting left behind by your buddies when things got really tough. But as we'll see, surviving was something Glass became really good at. Okay, so now let's talk about that one time when Hugh Glass had a slightly less pleasant encounter with nature. In 1823, he went on an expedition that was supposed to be pretty standard: gather fur, survive, don't get eaten. But of course, this is the actual wild, and nothing is ever that easy. Glass, being the experienced frontiersman he was, ventured out ahead of the group for a little scouting. Bad idea, right? So, he unwittingly crossed paths with a mother grizzly bear, and as we all know, mama bears aren't exactly looking to make new friends. This bear, feeling a bit protective of her cubs, did what any bear would do. She decided to turn Glass into a snack. The attack was brutal. She swiped at his face and body like she was swatting at an annoying fly. But unfortunately for Glass, this was no ordinary fly. It was a bear, and Glass's body was about to become her personal chew toy. His face was shredded, his leg was broken, and his back looked like someone had taken a carving knife to it. To say it was a close call would be an understatement. The dude looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with a freight train. But here's where it gets interesting. Glass, despite being mauled like he was the bear's next meal, somehow still managed to grab his rifle and shoot the bear dead. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. He was bleeding out, barely able to move, and still managed to kill the thing that nearly ended his life. Talk about sheer willpower. It's almost like he was too stubborn to die, like, you know what? I'm not going out like this. But here's where things went from bad to, oh no, this is really bad? His group found him and, understandably, were horrified. They didn't think he was going to make it, so 2 of the men, Jim Bridger and John Fitzgerald, were left behind to care for him. And when I say care for him, what I really mean is they decided he was a lost cause and left him. Because, you know, that's what you do when your buddy gets mauled by a bear and looks like he's about to drop any minute. So, yeah, Fitzgerald and Bridger made the questionable decision to abandon Glass in the middle of nowhere, figuring he'd be dead soon enough. But what they didn't count on was Glass's stubbornness. Because when you're Hugh Glass, you don't just die, you survive, even when it looks like there's no way in hell you could. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about anything other than, I'm still breathing, and I'm going to find a way to get out of this mess. And that's where the real story begins. The story of one man's relentless fight to survive in the wildest, most unforgiving conditions, with nothing but his wits and a will stronger than steel. But more on that later. You won't believe how it all unfolds. Okay, so we've seen Hugh Glass get mauled by a bear, left for dead. But now, let's talk about how he survived the actual wilderness afterward. Spoiler alert, it's nothing short of insane. Glass didn't just take a nap and wait for someone to come rescue him. No, he wasn't waiting around like the "I'll just sit here until someone finds me" type. Glass was in full survival mode. We're talking about a man who had been shredded by a bear, abandoned by his own crew, and left in the middle of the wilderness with nothing but his determination and the few supplies he managed to scrape together after the attack. If that doesn't scream bad situation, I don't know what does. So, the first problem? Well, he had no choice but to make his way through some of the harshest terrain imaginable. Snow, cold rivers, rugged mountains, just your average walk in the park for someone who had been nearly eaten alive. But Glass wasn't exactly in the mood to take a scenic route. Every step forward was a battle against the elements. He had to make quick decisions about where to find food, water, and shelter, while his body was doing its best impression of a ragdoll. Oh, and did I mention that his body was in shambles? Yeah, his leg was broken, his back was sliced up, and his face looked like a piece of raw meat after a bear's feast. But Glass kept going. He knew he had to keep moving, not just to stay alive, but to find help. And that's exactly what he did. For weeks, he crawled, limped, and dragged himself through the mountains. He ate whatever he could find, small animals, plants, and probably whatever else the wilderness had to offer. And it wasn't pretty, but guess what? He didn't die, he didn't even quit. We're talking about hundreds of miles Glass had to cover. That's right. This man, who had just been mauled by a bear, didn't stop to feel sorry for himself or whine about his situation. He just kept going. His body was wrecked, but his willpower, unstoppable. He pushed on all the way to Fort Kiowa, where safety was just a glimmer of hope on the horizon. And when he finally arrived, bruised and battered but still very much alive, people were like, "Wait, what? You survived all that?" You bet he did. All right, now let's talk about what really drove Hugh Glass. If you've seen the movie The Revenant, you probably think Glass's whole journey was fueled by this intense thirst for revenge. The film makes it look like he was on some kind of vendetta, ready to hunt down the men who abandoned him. And while he definitely had some payback on his mind, it's not exactly how the movie makes it seem. The film paints Glass as this guy obsessed with vengeance, like a one-man army chasing down the men who left him for dead. But in real life, revenge wasn't the main thing keeping him going. Survival was. In fact, Glass was more focused on staying alive and finding shelter than he was on getting back at Fitzgerald and Bridger. I mean, sure, he wanted to settle the score, but he wasn't out there with an axe to grind. He was out there because he was literally fighting for his life. It's easy to see why the movie took the revenge route, though. Revenge sells tickets. It's dramatic, it's cinematic. But let's be real, Glass wasn't plotting a blood-soaked mission to destroy his former crew. His motivations were much simpler. He wasn't thinking, "I'll show them." He was thinking, "I need to survive long enough to get to someone who can help me." Glass had been through hell and back, and in the end, he made it because his drive to survive was stronger than anything else. He wasn't driven by revenge, he was driven by his own survival. Yes, he eventually went after the men who left him behind, but it was more about getting closure than it was about seeking retribution. His focus was always on surviving the wilderness, not on plotting out the perfect revenge story. And honestly, that's way more impressive. It's one thing to survive a bear attack, it's another to survive an entire wilderness when the odds are stacked against you. So, while the movie turned Glass's journey into a revenge-fueled action flick, the real story is much more about pure grit and determination than it is about a guy out for blood. It's a tale of how survival instincts can push a person to do the unimaginable even when they're at their lowest. Let's get right into it. After clawing his way back to life, literally, Hugh Glass didn't just sit around and let bygones be bygones. Nope. He went on a mission to find the two guys who left him to rot. Now, was it fueled by rage, betrayal, or just a stubborn sense of justice? Probably all three. First, let's talk about John Fitzgerald. This guy was the ringleader when it came to ditching Glass. He wasn't exactly oozing compassion. He took one look at Glass's mangled body and thought, "Yeah, we're done here." And then there was Jim Bridger, who was more like the nervous sidekick in this mess. He was young, inexperienced, and likely terrified of both the situation and Fitzgerald. In fairness, Bridger probably didn't see himself as abandoning Glass, but more as following orders. Spoiler, Glass didn't see it that way. When Glass eventually made his way back, against all odds, he tracked them down. But it wasn't some Hollywood-style guns-blazing showdown. With Bridger, Glass seemed to hold back. Maybe he saw the kid as more of a pawn than an instigator. Fitzgerald, though, wasn't so lucky. Glass confronted him directly, but instead of turning it into a bloody revenge saga, he chose a different kind of justice. Fitzgerald had joined the army by then, making him untouchable without severe consequences. So, Glass made sure everyone knew exactly what Fitzgerald had done, tarnishing his name in the fur-trapping community. In the end, Glass didn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He sought justice, not chaos. And let's be honest, it's way more satisfying to watch a guy like Fitzgerald squirm under the weight of his tarnished name than to give him a quick and easy end. Now let's tackle something Hollywood didn't get quite right: Hugh Glass's interactions with Native American tribes. In the movie, it's all tension and hostility, like every tribe out there had it in for him. But the reality, way more nuanced and way more human. Glass encountered various tribes during his grueling journey, and not all of them were out to scalp him. For instance, members of the Arikara tribe played a crucial role in helping him survive. They weren't enemies, they were people who saw a man in dire need and extended a hand. This wasn't an uncommon thing back then. Native tribes were deeply intertwined with the fur trade, often collaborating with trappers like Glass. But of course, Hollywood loves its drama. So, the film leaned heavily on the whole man versus savage wilderness trope, portraying Native Americans as relentless threats. Sure, there were conflicts during that time, but it wasn't all blood and war cries. Many interactions were about trade, alliances, and sometimes survival partnerships. What's fascinating is how Glass managed to navigate these dynamics. He wasn't just surviving the wilderness. He was surviving the complexities of human relationships in a volatile era. That's the part of his story that often gets overshadowed. The tribes he encountered weren't just obstacles, they were part of the intricate fabric of frontier life, offering help, or, at the very least, not making things worse. So, while the movie dramatizes the action for entertainment's sake, the reality is more layered. Glass's survival wasn't just about brute strength or grit, it was also about understanding the people around him and building connections, even in the harshest conditions. And that's a story worth telling. So, what do you think? Was Hugh Glass the toughest man in history, or just incredibly lucky? And how much of his story do you think we'll ever fully know?